They've been through 40 years of hell here, civil war and then gang terrorism.
It was living in a constant state of fear.
But President Bukele decided we need to turn this around. He moved on the gangs. It was kind of a surgical strike.
And he set his people free. You go from living in fear to living like anything's possible.
El Salvador is the first country in the world that is teaching every single student ages 7 and up what is money. Then they have the Bitcoin Diploma for the more high school range. And we're already seeing the results of this education. So when I said other countries don't realize how far behind they are, I see it every day here.
There's an incredible, diverse group of people all kind of converging in on El Salvador. Personally, I see it as a race here between Bitcoin low time preference development and the Fiat high time preference development. You know, the clay's still wet. You can still mold things. And as Bitcoiners, I think we have a responsibility. Like, this country could be a shining example of the impact Bitcoiners can make on a civilization. And this is why we talk about this potentially being the birthplace of new renaissance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bitcoin News Channel. I'm your host, Rob Wallace, and today I'm very grateful to be joined by two experts on El Salvador. We have Jethro Toro and Michael Ruiz, two men who have lived in El Salvador for years and seen the Bitcoin experiment firsthand. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Great. I'm doing fantastic.
Nice, wonderful. So it's so good to have two guys who have spent so much time in the country itself to explain and update us on what is actually going on in Bitcoin country. So for the audience, Michael, please introduce yourself and tell us about your story in El Salvador.
Okay, so my name is Michael Ruiz. I'm an entrepreneur here in El Salvador. I came here about 2 years ago, first time as an initial visit. Came back every month after that for about 6 months until I decided to live here full time. Since that time, I've tried to spin up a couple businesses, going through the learning curve, getting adjusted to life here in El Salvador. Those businesses were great stepping stones. It was Nakamoto Express and then Sovereignty Studios. And now my current project is Building El Salvador, which is an entrepreneurial ecosystem designed to help those builders who are serious about decentralization, serious about Bitcoin, serious about building out a new paradigm, allow them a platform and a space to get to know each other, collaborate, and see what comes from that. So yeah, that's a kind of nutshell of my experience here in El Salvador.
Cheers. Thank you. And Jethro.
Yeah, so I first came to El Salvador in August 2023. It was just a few months after the Silicon Valley bank run. And my background is economics, data analytics, and also studying Austrian economics even before I got into Bitcoin. So I saw that, the wealthiest bank, or one of the wealthiest banks in one of the wealthiest parts of the world's wealthiest economy, having a run on the bank. I took that as kind of a warning shot that we need to take the Bitcoin economy seriously. We need to actually get this thing up and running, prove that it's viable in the real world. And of course, we all heard about El Salvador in 2021, the first country in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. So clearly the place with the most momentum. I decided to move down here, check it out for myself. I ended up staying 8 months, co-founding a circular economy conference in Bitcoin Berlin. And now I also host the Bitcoin Country podcast for the past few months. I was the MC of the National Theater Stage at Bitcoin Historico. I've been interviewing pretty much a lot of the biggest names in Bitcoin, the best and brightest minds, founders, investors, like fund managers, technologists, just all authors, all sorts of interesting people coming through Bitcoin country, because this is the country with the most Bitcoiners per capita in the world. Bitcoiners are always flowing through here for various events. So it's just a really exciting place to be. And I essentially see my job as just shining a spotlight on the positive things. So very excited to discuss it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Been following you guys on X, and it's so cool to see what you're building on a weekly basis. Always some new content coming out from both of you guys, and it's impressive stuff. So before we get into Bitcoin and the story there, I just want to understand what it feels like. You guys are both Americans and you moved to El Salvador, which is definitely a developing country. And so what does that feel like? What is the day-to-day and explaining to Americans the transition of going from America to El Salvador?
You want to take this first?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, it definitely is different. I mean, I'm from Washington, D.C. Michael's from Miami. Those are two of the biggest, wealthiest cities in the entire country. And so it is undeniably a culture shock at first. But at the same time, it's the safest country in the world. So for one thing, you can walk around comfortably outside unlike many of those big cities, especially certain sections of those big cities, I've never once felt in danger from anybody walking around here. And even though there is visible poverty, one, that's of course understandable. They've been through 40 years of hell here, civil war and then gang terrorism. So you have to understand where they were. And then also just being here over time, you see the progress and it's just remarkable. Like when I first came to El Zonte, Bitcoin Beach in August 2023, it was still dirt roads everywhere. And within a few months, the entire town was paved and like high quality roads. It's just amazing. The transformation that's happening all over the country all of the time. And I'm pretty nomadic within the country, so I actually spend a lot of time even in rural mountain towns like Berlin and La Laguna and Chalatenango. So I've seen the full range, but then you also see like Centro Historico was recently renovated, and there is a real emphasis on beauty here, and infrastructure is a priority as well for the Bukele administration. So it is a third world country, but as Max Kaiser would say, they're actually leapfrogging the first world into another world just because the transformation is happening so fast and they're embracing the future in so many ways. But I'll let Michael give his perspective.
Yeah, so, I think being here in El Salvador is one of the most unique experiences that you can have right now in the world, because this is the only country where you are getting such a high concentration of Bitcoiners, forward thinkers, people who think outside the box, who see the problems of the world and want to act towards, fixing them. And we're all here in proximity. I mean, to get from one end of the country to the other end of the country, it takes about, 4 or 5 hours. Basically, you can be anywhere that is significant within, 45 minutes. So the proximity leads us to building a community out here. And I think those multiple touch points where you're meeting these interesting people, having interesting conversations, talking about big ideas, and then not only that, seeing people execute on that. It's one of the most invigorating places I've ever been to. And it's also, I'm really optimistic about the future. And if you look out in the world right now, where do you see that? Where do you see this place? Like somebody came to our roundtable last night. He's from the Netherlands, and he's like, he was blown away because of the entrepreneurial spirit. He called it the American entrepreneurial spirit is alive over here. And you can really feel that. So I think as a Bitcoiner, being in El Salvador, living here, I mean, if you're looking for adventure, if you're looking for meaning, if you're looking for purpose, if you're looking to be part of something that is important, and also a different trajectory to where the world is headed, I think El Salvador is a place to be. Yeah, it's a developing country. Yeah, you're going to have inconveniences. Yeah, there's antiquated systems you have to deal with. But I think the trade-off is well worth it. The reward that you get here, living in alignment with your values, being able to live on a Bitcoin standard, being able to have friends that get it and understand things that you see with a similar worldview. I don't know, man. I go to the States a lot. I'm from Miami. I just spent 10 days there, and I couldn't wait to get back. And that's because of this frontier spirit that's happening here. And it's just, for me, it's contagious. It's invigorating. I'm 43, and, it gave me a new kind of shot at life, and just doing something meaningful. And it's been great. So like I said, trade-offs, but I think the trade-offs are worth it.
And if I could actually riff on that, El Salvador really is the most inspiring place in the world. I just visited home for Easter, and like Michael said, I wanted to come right back here. There is just an energy to this place. And even though we mentioned, El Salvador started out pretty far behind in a lot of ways economically, they were held back because it was too dangerous to build businesses. But now we're seeing things change so quickly. And even though, the first world is more developed, but they're also set in their ways with a lot of problems with the fiat system. So we've seen in the US, it's difficult to orange people when they already have their bank accounts all ready to go. They think their 401k is all safe and reliable, and the bonds and all of that. But here, there are a lot of people, a lot of Salvadorans, especially in rural areas, are actually unbanked. So they've just been able, in many cases, to leapfrog over the fiat system, over being trapped in the banks, just straight into Bitcoin. So that's, again, when Max is saying they're leapfrogging the first world into this other world, that's a perfect example right there. And also the roundtable that Michael organized with the Build in El Salvador community, it was actually a perfect example of this as well. So you mentioned the guy from the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the agricultural capital of Europe with many different crops and things. And he was talking about how it's actually repressed there. The government is making it harder. But here, President Bukele's administration, they actually sent somebody to the roundtable last night. She was taking notes. They're actively embracing the change. They want to do things the right way. Several years ago, President Bukele actually messaged a guy named Aaron Murphy. He runs Murph's Life Foundation. He's leading the way with permaculture in El Salvador now, with over 10,000 fruit trees, including and also like berries, things that people didn't even think would grow in El Salvador. And President Bukele personally messaged him to come and bring that to El Salvador. Now they're working with the Beef Initiative as well. The Beef Initiative has some top-of-the-line cattle in Texas, in quarantine, ready to be flown down here, because El Salvador used to be the cattle capital of Central America as well. But again, so during those 40 years, it was impossible to do things. El Salvador got to the point where it was 90% importing food, and they're quickly flipping that around. So for example, tomatoes were similarly 90% imported. Now they're over half grown domestically. And El Salvador has so many natural resources, pristine water, volcanic soil that is very nutrient dense. And it's like, it has all of these advantages, very entrepreneurial people. They just needed the safety. So in terms of where it was and where it's already going, that's what I tend to focus on, is just, it's extraordinarily inspiring, the transformation.
Yeah, 100%. I visited El Salvador in 2023 and 2024. And one thing that really struck me was just the entrepreneurial spirit in the air, and also the feeling when a nation is on the come up is undeniable, right? When you see the cranes in the sky, the roads being improved, and you can feel that this opportunity is here and it's building. There's something that is really hard to replicate unless it's actually happening, right? Unless there's real growth and it's infectious. So like everybody, it spreads to everyone, and it means that there's more smiles, more friendliness. How do the El Salvadorians welcome Americans and foreigners in general to their country?
Well, I would just say in my experience, the Salvadorans are wonderful people. I tweeted one time that, it was just a small group of thugs that held back a really sophisticated and civilized society over here. And so what I've come to find here in El Salvador is that the Salvadoran people are welcoming. They're happy for their country. They're happy that other people are interested in their country. They're happy that people are coming here to build, and that they view or can identify the potential here. When I have these conversations with Salvadorans, they just light up when you talk about El Salvador and how great it is. They're like, really? El Salvador? And it's like, wow. And so I think for the first time in a long time, they're able to have pride in their country. And as of, like right now, the sentiment that I've only gotten is welcoming. And so, I think they're happy about what's happening.
Yeah, I completely agree in my experience. And it's not just the expats coming that they're happy about. It's also the Salvadoran diaspora returning. Because again, when it was too dangerous, over 2 million Salvadorans left to other countries, largely the United States, Canada, Australia, or Europe. And so many of them are now actually starting to return. They're investing in properties. They're starting to build businesses here. And the general vibe is, among the people actually living here, is the more the better. Like, it's just exciting times with so many people, returning home and then also finding this as a new home and really embracing it. And it's just a lot of love vibes going around.
Wonderful. Well, one thing that struck me that was sort of funny to me was seeing the amount of American fast food that was popping up all over the place. There's lots of Denny's and KFC. Do you see that across the country? Why is there so much American fast food in El Salvador?
Yeah. So, I mean, what would we call that? Like Fiat slop, right? Just basically, these businesses that are very high time preference and extractive, and then also, not really thinking about second order, third order effects like people's health. These corporations that are just interested in the bottom line and profiteering. And so you do see a lot of that over here. And personally, I see it as a race here in El Salvador between, Bitcoin, low time preference development, and the Fiat high time preference development. And, I think there's going to be both, right? And that's just the reality. El Salvador has opened up its country to investment, and it needs the development too. So you got to remember that for a lot of places, they didn't have any development. So going to the grocery store meant getting 2 hours or 3 hours on a bus, going to the grocery store, buying groceries, and going back. And so when a strip mall opens up, a cheap, strip mall, and it opens up 10 minutes away, that significantly increased the quality of life for that Salvadoran. So, at this point, the way I see it is any development is good development for the Salvadoran. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that we want to do with Build in El Salvador is kind of approach these issues and talk about how can we, influence what's happening here. So the builders, the developers can think more on a long-term perspective, on a low time preference mindset. And, so the strip mall that gets put in, but it gets put in with, sustainable material or locally sourced stuff, or is built in a way where, this food that they serve is prioritized to be healthy or something like that. So it's going to take time. You're going to have a bit of both. I've coped with it. And, I think, though, the window of opportunity for Bitcoiners here to come here and make an impact with their projects, with their visions, really live out a life on a Bitcoin standard, that window of opportunity excites me because I don't see that anywhere else in the world. Like we mentioned before, when I go to Miami, Miami's developed. It's built out. It's, and it's set in its ways. But over here, the clay's still wet. Someone told me one time, you can still mold things. And as Bitcoiners, I think we have a responsibility. Like this country could be a shining example of the impact Bitcoiners can make on a civilization. And this is why we talk about this potentially being the birthplace of new renaissance. Because if enough Bitcoiners see that window of opportunity, come here with their low time preference projects and really start contributing to the, to circular economy over here, I think this could be the way this develops out over the next 10, 20, 30 years could be a shining example for the rest of the world.
I completely agree, especially the race between the fiat capital and Bitcoin capital is very real, but the fiat capital is mostly concentrated in the city areas, so largely around San Salvador and the corridor going south into Surf City. So most of the country is still that clay that is waiting to be molded, and a lot of Salvadorans are like-minded. They align with the Bitcoiners who want to build consciously. So for example, at the roundtable, the agricultural roundtable last night, some of the speakers were Salvadorans building not only a regenerative farm, also an organization that is about environmental regeneration as well. So there are, you do see some investors, fiat investors, who want to tear down trees to build a new high rise. But you also see both Salvadorans and internationals alike who want to preserve this beautiful land with its pristine volcanic soil and the water. And there's just so much beauty here to be preserved and to be built around in harmony. So there's actually a real opportunity. And also regarding the point about the American chains, well, for one thing, so the U.S. influence on El Salvador is pretty strong because the countries are so close, and also because so many Salvadorans had to leave when it was dangerous. Many of them came to the U.S. For example, my original home, D.C., has one of the highest concentrations of Salvadorans in the entire country. So I actually knew some growing up. On every time I fly there or back, it's absolutely packed. Salvadorans want to come back too, and so some American culture overlap is inevitable. I actually love, a lot of Salvadorans love 80s rock music, for example. So I love that aspect of it. And you'll get the fast food chains, but for one thing, there aren't really that many of them. Some of them accept Bitcoin even after the IMF deal, like Wendy's, you can still pay with Bitcoin. But more importantly, you also, throughout the country, outside of these hot spots of fiat investment, you still have all of this opportunity where Salvadorans actually own their land, they own their small businesses, and this is really where we've seen Bitcoin adoption take off the most. So it all started with Bitcoin Beach in 2019, and everybody knows the story by this point, I'm sure, with Mike Peterson and Chimbera, and how they basically received a Bitcoin donation, and they already had Hope House as a project to keep kids out of the gangs, and so they started paying the kids in sats to clean up the beach. And then the kids would then go around to the different stores and they would want to spend their Bitcoin. So it started with these small businesses, locally owned, where you can actually speak to the decision maker, and they were the most receptive to Bitcoin. And then we see this as well with the second big circular economy that got started in El Salvador in the town called Berlin. It's actually about 8 times bigger than El Zonte. And It's also an agricultural hub up in the mountains. It's one of the best coffee growing regions in the entire country. El Salvador is one of the best coffee countries in the entire world. And there's also cacao and other crops. And it's also kind of a ranching hub for the country. But we really see a lot of these small businesses using real food and doing things the right way. And that's also actually where we see the most overlap with Bitcoin.
I wanted to briefly interrupt today's interview to give a big shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is the all-in-one Bitcoin super app built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Buy or sell instantly. Send sats anywhere on the Lightning Network. Withdraw straight to cold storage. Even turn sats into gift cards or link to a Casa multisig, all within one sleek interface. And Rhino is just warming up. Soon, you'll pay bills, borrow against your Bitcoin, and save for retirement, all without leaving the app. Download Rhino at rhinobitcoin.com or tap the link in the description below. Use promo code Bitcoin News and Rhino will drop you $10 of free Bitcoin into your account today. Secure your stack with Rhino Bitcoin and enjoy the rest of the video.
So that's what I prefer to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into the Bitcoin topic here. So we've got two main hubs, as you were saying. We've got Bitcoin Beach, which really started it all and gave inspiration to Bukele to go deep into Bitcoin with the 2021 legal tender law. And then we have Berlin up in the mountains, which is one of the strongest Bitcoin circular economies, I think, in the world, right? So let's compare these two places. What kind of communities grow up around the two, and how is Bitcoin used in each? Michael, if you want to talk about Bitcoin Beach right now, what's it like in 2026?
Okay, cool. So Bitcoin Beach, I think, is going to become a tourist destination. You already got high rises coming in. The impact for money coming into that area, you're starting to see that development, more high rises. And, as far as the circular economy over there, I think that they've adopted the name Bitcoin Beach, the businesses over there. And so what you'll find is most places do accept Bitcoin. And so it's a place that you can go on vacation. You can, you can pay in Bitcoin. You can have that experience. And yeah, it's, I don't make it down there anymore. It's kind of like the first stop to El Salvador. And but it's cool. It's cool to go there. It's cool to go to Bitcoin hardware store to meet up with Ronnie and attend one of his workshops. The beach, it's great surfing over there. And when it's low tide, it's for me one of the prettiest beaches in El Salvador, especially with that sunset over there. And so I think that what really excites me is how Bitcoin is now starting to seep into other areas of the country as well. And so Bitcoin Beach is the place you got to go to if you're a Bitcoiner and has never been to El Salvador. But, what I'm seeing here as far as Bitcoin circular economies, I'm seeing more transactions being done in Bitcoin. I'm seeing more professional services accepting Bitcoin. I even seen some contracts done in Bitcoin from some diehard Bitcoiners that want to, use Bitcoin as a unit of account over here. And that's what you get over here in El Salvador, by the way. You get people who are really interested in ideologically living in alignment with a Bitcoin standard and going so far as to assume, certain risks that come along with that, like, exchange rate risk on a contract or something, or just assume the loss and procure your services with that, knowing that could be a possibility. And so that's one of the really cool things about it. But yeah, like I said, I think these circular economies are great. But what really excites me is just kind of seeing this now break the taboo and enter the professional world here in El Salvador.
Very cool.
Could I actually add a little bit more about Bitcoin Beach?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it is still one of the world leading circular economies. And they actually, just in January, they hosted a circular economy summit where they flew in leaders of projects from around the world to come learn from each other. And as Michael mentioned, it was a popular surfing destination, actually, even before it was Bitcoin Beach. That's why Mike Peterson came to El Salvador like 20 years ago, even when it was still dangerous. He's just a surfer, and El Salvador has world-class surfing. So it already was touristy in that sense. And now it's become, I think, probably the wealthiest part of El Salvador, or at least the highest concentration, kind of the most expensive. So it absolutely is worth visiting. The main reason I think people have moved out to other parts of the country is just because you can get better deals. But, if for every Bitcoiner, Bitcoin Beach is still kind of like our Mecca. You got to go there. You got to pay for many people, it's their first ever Lightning transaction when they come to Bitcoin Beach. That's been true for so many people, and even some big names, like some, more macro type people or investor types, they're big on Bitcoin as a store of value, but they've never actually used it as a medium of exchange until they come to Bitcoin Beach. So that's still happening all of the time. It's still absolutely beautiful. They got a world-class podcast studio there too. You can also pay for surfing lessons in Bitcoin as well as your food, and it's just an amazing experience. Absolutely beautiful. And Max and Stacy also are investors in a phenomenal restaurant there called La Cajita Kitchen, where they have French chefs. It's this beautiful overlook right in front of the best surfing spot. So they've actually hosted 2 surf contests there with world-class surfers. The Olympian Brian Perez just won the most recent one over Easter weekend, and all the Salvadorans during Easter week, they flocked down to the beach. So it was an incredible spectacle. And yeah, so El Zonte is still amazing, and they've inspired all of the other circular economies around the world.
100%. And then tell us a little bit more about Berlin. What's going on up there? And what is the history that some Germans actually got shipwrecked and started that community back 100 plus years ago, something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was the late 1800s. Germans shipwrecked, and like you said, they just fell in love with the country. They came inland. They found the mountains are a cooler climate. People think El Salvador is so hot, being tropical, and that is true on the beach. But you change your altitude, you change the temperature, and so that's actually part of why I ended up staying in Berlin longer term. But so I first heard about it. Well, so the project started around April or May of 2023, and it was actually 2 Salvadorans, Gerardo Linares and Evelyn Limus. And they were already working with Mi Primer Bitcoin, who was working with the government at the time, educating about Bitcoin in schools. And Gerardo and Evelyn decided to actually break off from that because they were more interested in circular economies. So they started their own thing in Berlin, which is this agricultural hub. I kind of like to think of it as the bridge to the eastern half of the country too. So a lot of visitors, when they come to El Salvador, they come to El Salvador, they go to the capital, San Salvador. They go to Surf City, El Zonte, maybe up to Santa Ana, the Ruta de las Flores. That's all west. But the eastern half of the country is really starting to develop now. And so the Surf City 2 highway was just paved. They're building a new airport out in La Union. And I see Berlin as this perfect bridge into the east for Bitcoiners. And so it's a town about 8 times bigger than El Zonte. It's an agricultural hub that is it's within a 1-hour radius of 3 big cities in the area, San Vicente, Usulután, and San Miguel. So it is just kind of this perfect hub for Bitcoiners, for agricultural trade up in the mountains in a place with world-class coffee. A British Bitcoiner, actually, Harry, shout out to Finca La Cruz, he started his own, he bought a coffee finca, and he is actually growing coffee, selling it for sats. He pays his employees in sats. And it's just probably the most hyper Bitcoinized place on earth. So Gerardo and Evelyn started that in 2023. I first heard about it around August. When I came to El Zonte, I spent 2 months there, and I started hearing about Berlin. And then in October, I decided to go check it out for myself. Ended up falling in love with the place just because it's so inspiring what's happening there. It's not just Bitcoiners coming around proselytizing, it's actual Salvadorans who see this opportunity for their country to embrace the future, to lead the way with this innovative sound money and spread it. They want to lift up other Salvadorans as well with it. So they went to the school first. They taught the students about Bitcoin. They onboarded the shop within the school so that the kids could pay with sats. And then the kids loved it so much that they actually started going around with Gerardo and Evelyn to these locally owned small businesses and saying, oh, you've got to accept Bitcoin. You got to accept Bitcoin. And so they very quickly got the first couple dozen businesses on board. And then within a year, actually, within a year, they were already over 100 merchants. I think it was like 120 or something. And now it's very close to 200 merchants. So still going strong over 2 years later. Many of the merchants not only accept Bitcoin, they don't just cash out in many cases, they actually spend it with each other. So it's Samson Mao once called it the most circular of circular Bitcoin economies. I think that is absolutely true, and it really needs to be experienced for yourself, for any Bitcoiners visiting El Salvador.
Very cool. And Michael, you are sort of like an ambassador for Bitcoiners coming from abroad who want to check out the country, get established, start a business. What kind of talent do you see coming from other countries? Has the number picked up in terms of more Bitcoiners coming? And what kind of businesses do they like to start once they're there?
Yeah, well, when I started Sovereignty Studios, literally had people flying in from all different parts of the world so we could land in El Salvador and assemble a team. So we had people from Estonia, people from Hawaii, I was from Miami, and then other team members came from Texas, from Venezuela, from El Salvador. It was just an incredible, diverse group of people all kind of converging in on El Salvador to, like I said, live in alignment with the Bitcoin ethos, to see what kind of opportunities are here to build cool things, to find ways to build businesses and make it on their own. And so from that, I mean, I've just encountered incredible talent. Yesterday we had someone at a roundtable. So my developers that are working on our Build in El Salvador app, we launched it to the community yesterday. And, one of these guys that's connected to Silicon Valley and hangs out in the startup circles, he was like amazed that my developers were literally working through the roundtable in order to add features that were requested when they, when they were demoing the app. And so, yeah, you just find incredibly talented people who are ambitious, people who are smart, intelligent, and then also one of the things, we're living in the age of AI, and you're gonna have to adapt, and you're gonna have to figure out how to wield AI or be replaced by it, right? And so over here, building El Salvador, we're having an AI workshop along with the Bitcoin hardware store. So the other thing that we're noticing is that we're building a community of people who are engaged in their growth, and it's just an incredible energy to be around. So in terms of the talent I'm seeing here, all the way from media to programmers to even Jethro, watching Jethro, grow into this media personality. He hosted our roundtable yesterday as the MC. And, I interviewed Jethro 2 years ago on the beach, and he was just, this kid trying to figure it out over here. And now he's on a national stage with the Bitcoin office. So you get these people, they come here with big dreams, and you get to see them grow into it. And it's been one of the most, one of the rewarding experiences I've had. And listen, I think as the world goes the way the world goes, and if El Salvador maintains its position, we're gonna see a migration of just talent coming here. And I'm really excited, again, when you combine that talent with the proximity of that this country offers, you're gonna see all types of collaborative initiatives, projects come out of it. And again, you know how Bitcoiners are, right? We're curious about the world, we're curious about how things work, we're curious about how incentives drive things. And so, you get that with that kind of mindset. And it's I think some really cool stuff is going to be coming out of El Salvador.
And another important part of all this equation is the education segment, right? So we have the Kubo Plus program for developers. We also have elementary school kids learning about Bitcoin. And so we're just going to have generation after generation of Bitcoiners that are being grown and cultivated right now to be spawned out onto the world in a couple of years from now as full-fledged adults ready to spread the word about Bitcoin. So let's talk about the education initiatives, what's going on a school basis, and how do little kids take to learning about Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it's so funny to me when people from other parts of the world and fiat countries still question if El Salvador is Bitcoin country. They don't even know how far behind they still are. So El Salvador is the first country in the world that is teaching every single student ages 7 and up what is money. And Stacy, Herbert, and Lena Sage and other Bitcoin experts crafted this curriculum, tailored it to their age to make it fun and engaging. And that's just the start. Because then after the what is money for, I think it's ages 7 to 13, then they have the Bitcoin Diploma for the more high school range. And so it doesn't just stop. In other countries, they don't teach about personal finance at all. I mean, we're from the US and it's like the world's biggest economy, but they don't actually teach you personal finance in high school. You see so many people end up in debt and just making other bad money decisions because they were never taught. It's not that they're stupid, they were just never taught. But El Salvador is embracing the future and empowering its people. And so it's not only what is money and then the Bitcoin diploma, but then also for the best and brightest, that's where the Kubo Plus program comes in. So it started out as a collaboration, Stacy, Herbert, the Bitcoin office, and Jimmy Song, who of course is one of the most widely respected Bitcoin educators in the entire space. And he started out, it was called the Jimmy Song 7, the initial class, and that planted the seeds. And then after that, Stacy brought in Giacomo Zucco, another world-renowned Bitcoin educator, and he really helped build it up into a full curriculum in collaboration with Vancouver Bitcoin. That actually evolved into Plan B, which many Bitcoiners are familiar with. You know, they do many great conferences, including here in El Salvador now. And so it's just been remarkable how it's grown over time, and we already are seeing the results of that. The goal was to create, prepare Salvadorans to actually be able to get jobs within the Bitcoin space, and we're already seeing that. So a cohort of Kubo graduates actually just went to Japan, where they met with Mempool, which is the industry standard in block explorers, one of the, an important tech company within the Bitcoin ecosystem. They just hired Kubo Plus graduates. We also see startups here within El Salvador, for example, BitTasker, which is a Nostr-based freelancing site built here in El Salvador. They hire Kubo students as well. So we're already seeing the results of this education. So when I said other countries don't realize how far behind they are, I see it every day here. But you have to see it to believe it. Mm-hmm. But El Salvador is embracing innovation in all of these different ways. And it's not just Bitcoin. It is, Michael mentioned AI building the app, and that is another big theme here as well. So the Bukele administration, they intentionally want to attract builders, and especially within the technology sector, they set it at 0 tax rate because they want people to come here. Economic liberty is a big part of President Bukele's platform. So that includes technological innovation. They're also now organizing the Sovereign AI Summit in a couple of weeks, where some of the biggest companies in the world, like NVIDIA and Google, are sponsors. World-respected thought leaders are coming to speak at the National Palace. And you're just getting all of this talent from both outside of El Salvador and also being empowered from within. So sky's the limit.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really cool to see what's happening here as far as the educational front, because it's coming from both the public and the private sectors. And in the public sector, I have to admit, right, like I wasn't a big fan of government-led educational initiatives, but seeing what Stacy Herbert has done with the Bitcoin office and seeing the effort that she's gone into making sure that Bitcoin here is part of the foundational curriculum for kids to go through is incredible. And then seeing a government that actually executes in a way that benefits its people. I mean, I don't know. We're not really used to that as Americans, right? And so it's just been incredible to watch what happens when government is actually interested in the well-being of its citizens. And like I said, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Stacy for the initiatives she's doing with the Bitcoin office, especially in the realm of education. Now, what's also cool is the private sector also stepping up. And like I said, with Building El Salvador, we have our own little educational initiatives that pop up here, right, and there. And you're seeing that happen all throughout the country. For instance, yesterday, James from Beef Back Better, he gave an announcement that he's working on Cowboy Plus. You know how there's Kubo Plus? Well, now there's going to be Cowboy Plus, where he's going to teach people how to be ranchers and get more in touch with the soil, get more in touch with their food. And I thought that was amazing. And so you're seeing educational initiatives on both fronts, and you're seeing them in ways that I don't think we've ever seen before. And so it's really exciting to see what comes out of that. Like you said, Rob, the other thing about Stacy is you could tell she really has a long-term vision, because she realized, hey, we have to get the kids educated on Bitcoin. And so, the fruits of that are generational. It takes 10, 20 years. But those seeds now have been planted. And so we will see, when you look out in the future and you wonder if El Salvador is going to be prosperous, well, you just look at the seeds that they planted and look at the nutrients that they're giving them. And, well, you can kind of extrapolate, hey, there's a good probability El Salvador is going to be a prosperous nation. And so even though we're early in the development phase, you can see the trend that this country is on.
And if I could just quickly add to that, Stacy's mottos are excellence only and no shortcuts. She really is building with low time preference. And also, just to quickly add, it is funny, Michael and I both come from this Ron Paul libertarian sort of background in the US context, but it's really challenged our assumptions. I think both of us feel this way. Seeing a government that actually does put its people first, it's not an accident that President Bukele has an approval rating over 90%. It's because people are actually happy with the job he's doing, because he actually cares about his people, and it's just common sense. You know, it's pretty low taxes, and the government spending that does exist is spent on infrastructure, education, fixing things like agriculture, more energy generation. That's one of the big advantages we see here in El Salvador, is they have an abundance of like geothermal and hydroelectric potential. So they're actually tapping into that, using it not only to mine Bitcoin, but then also building AI data centers, which creates a revenue stream as well. So we just see all of these intelligent, common sense moves, and they're really in. So it's also just like, it's not just any government. It's President Bukele and Max and Stacy. It's real Bitcoiners in there. So it is just a different vibe here. And they also empower actual builders.
I just want to say something too. It's actually kind of funny because you mentioned how Giacomo Zucco, right, was invited to teach these kids, and this guy's a hardcore anarchist, right? And so it's just a weird situation to see, you know, government officials and offices inviting, you know, just anarchist philosophers and actually like educators into their walls. So
and actually, just adding one more quick story on that. So after Bitcoin Historico back in November, the inaugural conference by the Bitcoin office at El Salvador's National Palace, there was an exclusive dinner with some of the leading, you know, headline speakers with President Bukele. So you actually had a few anarchists there. It was Giacomo Zucco, Knut Van Holm. I think Jimmy Song also considers himself one. And, you know, you have these anarchist Bitcoiners and the president, and they're joking about it together. So Giacomo actually, as a gift for President Bukele, brought a bottle of Dictador rum, just as a joke. And, you know, apparently Bukele is very quick-witted. He was laughing about it too. And at the end, he even at least jokingly apologized, like, sorry for running a government, guys, but at least it's a small one. So they think differently here.
Yeah. And a big initiative there, of course, is the Bitcoin office. And Jethro, I think you work closely with Stacy there. So tell us what goes on a day-to-day basis at the Bitcoin office, what kind of initiatives are coming up, and what should we look forward to in the future?
So the Bitcoin office and the AI agency both do a tremendous amount of work, and they're both run by the same people. So Stacy Herbert is the director, and Mario Jose Flamenco Rivas is her right-hand man. Salvadoran, who actually learned English partially by listening to Max and Stacy on the Kaiser Report, fun fact. So they're doing an incredible amount of work. Currently, so backing up a little bit, we've already covered Kubo Plus is a big one, the What is Money curriculum, the Bitcoin Diploma. They're doing so much there with education. They have a Bitcoin zone in the National Library with some of the best books about Bitcoin translated into Spanish. They're also spreading that throughout these other Kubos. They're essentially libraries throughout different parts of the country. So first of all, they are constantly spreading Bitcoin education. Then, of course, they also organized Bitcoin Historico just a few months ago. That was the first conference they did. And it was really just celebrating all of the progress so far. And it was just highlighting all of these different facets of adoption. So they included many talks from the grassroots, you know, like Bitcoin Beach, like Bitcoin Berlin, as well as the top-down, you know, government initiatives for Bitcoin adoption. So on the one hand, you have all of that. And then on the other hand, you have the AI agency now, which they are also doing. And I don't know how there are enough hours in the day or how they make it work, but they've done a tremendous amount of work. Just 1 year ago, El Salvador ranked in the bottom 5 out of every country in the entire world for AI preparedness. But President Bukele decided we need to turn this around, and he put none other than Stacy Herbert on the job. And 1 year later, they've made deals with many of the biggest companies in the world. This was the first country in the world to get state-of-the-art NVIDIA chips just a few months ago. They have a deal with XAI, Grok, as a personal tutor for over 1 million Salvadorans. They have energy deals, and it's just incredible, all of the different things that are going on. Google, they have Dr. SV, a health app, the #1 app in El Salvador. And it was a partnership with Google for essentially free medical information, and they can write prescriptions. So Salvadorans in remote towns, The same way that they don't have to travel into the city to set up a bank account, they can just use Bitcoin. Instead of having to go all the way into the city to see a doctor, they can, for many cases, they can just go on the app for free. They can get prescriptions written if necessary, just go to the local pharmacy. So it's driving down costs. They're using technology in all of these different ways to just increase prosperity and increase efficiency. And it's remarkable how much both the Bitcoin office and the AI agency team do.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And it's real thoughtful leadership. And of course, the man behind it all is Bukele himself. Sky high approval rating, at least from what we see on X. What is it like on the ground there in terms of the average El Salvadorans' view of Bukele? And also, what about key man risk? What happens after Bukele to El Salvador?
Okay, so I think in general, all my conversations that I've had with Salvadorans here, they view what Bukele has done as favorable. You know, I've been here now 2 years, and I have my Salvadoran circles now, and we get into conversations about what was life like in the past, and you know, how bad was it really? Like, as Bitcoiners, we don't like to trust, we like to verify. And so you have these conversations, and I like to also, hear the details. And so it was really bad. And for a lot of people, it was, it was living in a constant state of fear. And if you go around El Salvador, what you'll see is these, basically fortresses all around houses over here. Because, I mean, that's what you had to do to survive. And so, to have that change in such a dramatic way in such a short amount of time, it's like, it's an immediate release of pressure that has been put on the society. And for the first time, they're liberated to just live freely. And I mean, that, you can't put a value on that. I mean, it's a whole paradigm shift of quality of life. It's like you go from living in fear to living like anything's possible. Like now you can enjoy the time with your family without feeling like something potentially bad could happen to you. And you can travel anywhere in the country in that regard. And I have traveled a lot through El Salvador. One thing I have done here is explore. We walk land, we go to new towns. I like to go on an adventure kind of every week. Like I said, El Salvador is a small country, so everything's within proximity. And it's I've been in all types of situations where I've run out of gas in a small pueblo, to walking in a city in the city and being in a neighborhood that I'm like, I don't know about this. And actually, I've never felt unsafe. And I'm not trying to sell the country or safety, but I've literally never not felt unsafe. I think the biggest confrontation I've had personally or even seen is someone like aggressively honking at me, right? But that happens like 10 times in Miami. So yeah, it's just, so I have to compare it to living in Miami, right? Where you go to a gas station and you kind of got to be on guard about who's behind you, what's happening around you and stuff like that. And of course, you always want your situational awareness. But over here, I've never felt in a situation where like, we got to get in the car and we got to get out of here right now. And I think that's an incredible feeling. And like I said, I've been everywhere from remote locations to deep inside the city. So it is truly something incredible. Like if you've never felt that before, that amount of security, it is truly like a remarkable psychological feeling.
Yeah, Jethro. If I could add to that, the psychological transformation is the key here. So very, very early on, President Bukele said, where El Salvador is going is to the place where we want to be. Never let them tell you that you're too small to be big. He was focused on inspiring people, convincing the Salvadorans to believe in themselves and the power to turn this around. And that he did a lot of work in preparation before he moved on the gangs. It was kind of a surgical strike. He took them out very quickly. And people don't want to go back. I've heard horror stories. Michael's heard horror stories, all sorts. I won't go into the gory details, but even just something like trying to start a business and the gangs will come in, like starting a restaurant, for example. Gerardo Linares, the co-founder of Bitcoin Berlin, during the gang times, he tried to start a restaurant. And first they would come in and they'd be like, oh, can we have a drink? And then it's like, oh, can we have some food? And then it's like, oh, give us some money too. And it just kept escalating. And then he was just like, I can't run a business, even though he was entrepreneurial. So people don't want to go back. President Bukele has instilled this change and building with low time preference with emphasis on education, infrastructure, and beauty, inspiring people. I think the change, it's pretty much, the trajectory is set in stone at this point. And I think there is so much support for the vision that whenever Bukele moves on, he retires, I'm sure somebody else will step up because there are so many Salvadorans doing amazing things here now.
And I do want to say something as well as far as, the safety here in this country, and like a lot of credit is due to President Bukele and the tough decisions that he had to make, right? Despite, the repercussions that would come from that. And it takes a strong man, a strong leader to step up. And, this is why we say we live in an era right now where we need strong men to rise. And he did. And he set his people free and liberated them. But to add to that, I want to say that the Salvadoran people too are some of the nicest, sweetest, family-oriented people. And so, like I said, it once you get rid of the gangs, right, you have this civilization here that's just an amazing people. And so it's a testament to them as well, to the people of El Salvador, that it's so safe.
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, one anecdote I got from a Uber driver was that just when the gangs controlled everything, to leave his house and walk down the street to cross the street on a corner, the gang member would say, "Hey, give me a quarter," right? And when you're only making like $100 a month, having to pay a quarter every single time you cross the street, it adds up quickly. And just to have removed that gang tax from the daily life of El Salvador's population is such a huge relief. And of course, has led to this great flourishing that we're seeing today. And we're also seeing El Salvador play more of a role on the global stage, right? He was just in America visiting Trump as part of the summits of the Latin American countries. And I mean, El Salvador does find itself at this pivotal position close to America, but also China wants to play in here too. And so how does a country like El Salvador navigate this new role on the international stage?
Well, I think they're navigating it brilliantly, and I forget the exact wording, but President Bukele, I believe in a UN speech a couple of years ago, basically said, hey, like, we want to trade with you guys as peers with mutual respect. This is no longer going to be a subservient relationship. And he's actually earning that respect. And you mentioned the summits of the Americas. I think it was very telling, and coming from DC, you have kind of an appreciation for how these politics work. And the fact that President Trump put President Bukele literally as the right-hand man in the lineup for the big photo, I think that was very telling. The United States sees what's happening here in El Salvador as something that's good for the region, good in their own backyard, and they want to encourage other Latin American countries to follow Bukele's model. Lots of other countries in the region also want to copy it. Just a few months ago, the president of Costa Rica, which traditionally has been the Central American country where all the tourists from the US come down to, he actually flew up to El Salvador to visit President Bukele, and they signed the Coatepeque Accords, where basically El Salvador is helping to at least advise, I forget the exact details, but basically helping advise Costa Rica about how to be more safe. So we're seeing even other regional leaders now looking to El Salvador for leadership. So the standing in the world has risen, and I think President Bukele has done a brilliant job of being friendly with anybody who treats El Salvador respectfully. So there are a lot of business deals, of course, with the United States. Also China, so much of the world's manufacturing is in China that there's some trade there too. And the National Library is actually a good symbol of how President Bukele is able to get along with both countries, because China did contribute a lot of the funds for the library, but then there's also a lot of US culture in there. For the kids section, they'll have the Marvel and the Disney, the superheroes and stuff. So it's actually a beautiful symbol of getting along with everybody who treats El Salvador respectfully.
He's certainly playing chess while others are playing checkers. But Michael, from your perspective, if you're talking to foreigners, people in Europe or America who are interested in El Salvador, what does El Salvador need? What kind of businesses and what kind of talents, what's lacking there that someone from outside could come and build in the country in 2026?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And so I can say this. One of the things that is happening here in El Salvador is that it's on a trajectory of growth and prosperity, but it's going to take time, right? And right now we're in a phase where if you come down here and you start to assess what the economy needs, what the market needs, and you have a unique idea, I can almost guarantee you're going to be one of the first ones here. You're going to get that first mover advantage, So as far as what this country needs, I'm finding everything that I need to live and to thrive. But it just takes time. It takes time to learn where the businesses are. It takes time to get acclimated to, just the tempo of the country and finding the resources that you need. And so, personally, I would say it depends on the sector. If you're looking at tourism, some I would say hotels or boutique hotels with high quality standards right now is definitely a place that you can look. Some housing, maybe some housing that's built more in a generative way with some, again, high quality standards, especially as foreigners come here and you want to attract talent, they're going to want to live comfortably, right? And so I would say stuff within real estate, stuff within tourism. And then I would say if you're a developer, come down here, you're going to start finding projects that you can work with. So, not necessarily a business, but like we need more developers coming down here because there's a bunch of projects that could use you. And just that entrepreneurial spirit, coming down here, looking at where there's gaps in the market, where you could fit them in, and you're going to see as this country grows, you're going to prosper 100%.
And just to add to that quickly, so the tax incentives are particularly strong for technology businesses and tourism businesses. So especially Bitcoin companies, AI companies, come on down. El Salvador actively wants to recruit you right now. And then also, I think you have to think of El Salvador as in terms of the 40 years where they just couldn't build. Everything, all of the growth that we saw in other parts of the world was repressed from happening here. So suddenly that artificial constraint has now just been removed. So like Michael said, pretty much every sector, there is some room to take things to the next level just because they haven't been able to for 40 years and nobody else has gotten around to that particular idea yet. In particular, I would echo the point about like construction, development, and also energy security, food security, like sovereign production is a key priority of President Bukele's administration. So aligning with that, the construction boom, the infrastructure boom, and energy, and food as well. Like they're bringing in the beef initiative. A lot of ranchers are buying land to put cattle on. They brought in Murph's Life for farming. We see a lot of people coming down as well for that. So everything from food to construction to technology to tourism, there's a need in all sorts of different areas.
Sorry, I just want to jump in real quick because, the most obvious answer escaped me. But organic farming, regenerative agriculture, if you're in that space, come to El Salvador because, we could use you for sure.
And how much Spanish do you guys use on a daily basis, and how much do you need to actually live in El Salvador?
Hablo un poco, necesito aprender mucho más, pero practicar cada día, todos los días. Sí. I'm okay, but need more practice.
Yeah.
I'll save you guys my Spanish, but it's moving up the list of priorities, and I'll tell you why. If you come to El Salvador and you're active and you're busy and you're trying to build things and you're an entrepreneur or you're building some type of business, it really limits what you can do, and you don't operate as efficiently. And so learning the language, learning Spanish is absolutely necessary. And I just, there's been times where I felt emasculated for not knowing Spanish because I had to have my girlfriend battle and have my arguments for me. So I was like, tell him that, tell him this. And so I speak well enough to get by, but not well enough to have a full-fledged conversation. And so learning Spanish is definitely a priority.
Yeah, you can get by without it, but it helps a lot, especially just if you want to actually build anything here, and especially if you're building something physical or you're making deals yourself. Like Michael said, you want to be able to actually negotiate yourself. So the more you speak, the bigger of an advantage it is, but you can get by without it, especially if you have friends though many Salvadorans are fluent in both languages. And so, it helps. That can help and that can get you started, but it also helps to learn yourself. And also in Bitcoin Berlin, for example, at the Bitcoin Center, there are weekly classes where a lot of Salvadorans want to learn English too. So it can actually be a language exchange. So every week they just meet and practice with each other, and immersion is the best way to learn.
Absolutely. And so in conclusion here, I saw you guys did an event together recently where you talked about El Salvador in the fourth turning. Why do you want to be in El Salvador for the fourth turning?
I'll let Jethro answer that. That was his presentation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I prepared a talk called Navigating a Supply Shock. And as I mentioned earlier, my background is economics and data analytics. So even though I mostly do media and events now, I brushed off that old skill set because of the Strait of Hormuz situation with the war that's happening over there. And so just tracking a lot of the data, hopefully the conflict ends very soon. I'm praying for peace. But people need to realize that at least 1 month's worth of supply chains have been disrupted. So in terms of what comes through the Strait of Hormuz, it's 1/5 of the world's oil, 1/5 of the world's natural gas, 1/3 of the world's fertilizer, 1/3 of the world's helium. These are used in all sorts of different products that essentially build the modern world. And so when those supply chains are disrupted, it causes problems. And you really see, especially for countries that are dependent on energy and food imports, in a situation like that, where our entire global supply chains are built on fiat economies with high time preference incentives, things can break down pretty quickly. So it's actually a national security priority for countries to prioritize energy security and food security. And so we are seeing that here. And so I think in particular with the energy side of things, so because El Salvador has these abundant natural resources, 75% of El Salvador's energy is renewable. So again, geothermal, hydroelectric, solar, all of that is abundant here. And then in terms of the food, even before this current Strait of Hormuz supply chain situation, President Bukele was already prioritizing food security. They were already making it a goal to flip from 90% import to actually majority domestic production. And they have all of the ingredients for that. They do have the pristine water, the volcanic soil. And so it's just a matter of actually taking action. And El Salvador has all of these advantages. In terms of what can grow here, it's famous for coffee and cacao, but practically anything can grow here. I mean, coconuts, mangoes, bananas, tomatoes, like berries, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah, and the other thing I will say about this, sorry to interrupt, but it just gave me a thought. Like, there's all of that. There's all of that going for it, right? The strategic aspects of El Salvador during a crisis period, so to say. But I think also there's this fact that over here in El Salvador, there's always a helping hand. You have that vibe that we're all in it together. People are okay with living a simple life. So if you have these, fluctuations in standard of living, people aren't, I don't think people are necessarily going to be impacted psychologically as much as say, in the US. Also here, people are not riddled with debt. Sure, they live day to day and they live simply, but they don't have that pressure where they need to pay bills or lose their assets over here. And so I think on a social level as well, El Salvador is just a good place to be because it's a relaxed atmosphere. Food's abundant. People are happy living simply. You can get around the country relatively easy. And, a tank of diesel here lasts me, 3 weeks. And I travel around or something like that. And so, I just think that there's all these elements that, if you're going to be somewhere during a crisis period, El Salvador, I think, is a good place to be, as opposed to, other places of the world, let's say.
Yeah. Other countries are far more divided, but here there is a shared identity of, their strong Christian values, family values, and also people who know what it's like to be through hard times and have already been able to rally together as communities. So for that, as well as the natural resource abundance, there are just so many advantages to being here. And also because President Bukele, people criticize it, but the results speak for themselves. By locking up 1% of the world, of the country's population, he made it now the safest country in the entire world. And so in a time of crisis, the fact that, the people who would cause problems are already kind of removed from the communities it makes those communities much better prepared to deal with hard times.
It's funny. I just thought of this analogy, but like, you know how Bitcoiners, we've gone through our good times and our bad times. We've had our bull markets and our bear markets. We've seen the price crash 50%, 60%, 70%. And, that hardens you over time, right? You just become stoic. You become cool. You become calm. And if you think about it, the people of El Salvador and what they've seen and the trauma, I don't know, it's created a kind of, a resilience here that I haven't experienced somewhere else. So yeah, that's part of it too.
Well, gentlemen, you certainly made the case for El Salvador. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, your projects, and your social media, please share.
Sure, you can find me on X at Solve Mindset, and Build in El Salvador, our entrepreneurial ecosystem, you can find on X as well, at Build in ES.
Marvel,
yeah. You can follow me on X at Jethro Toro, JETHROTORO. I also host the Bitcoin Country podcast, which is exclusively on Rumble and X. I co-founded the Economy of Bitcoin conference in Bitcoin Berlin. We're probably going to do that again in November, which is after the Cornerstone event in November will be Bitcoin Historico Round 2. That'll be November 11th and 12th. So for anybody thinking about visiting El Salvador, November is, for any Bitcoiners in particular, November is going to be the best time because it's not just Bitcoin Historico, it's not just the event in Berlin. Aaron Murphy is organizing a regenerative homesteading summit. There's also a reclaiming health summit, which, sovereign health conscious people would be interested in. There's going to be a rodeo and all sorts of fun stuff. So November is the perfect time for Bitcoiners, and then also for people interested in AI. Actually, in less than 2 weeks, Stacy Herbert and the AI agency are organizing the Solve AI Summit, and it's also going to be at the National Palace, just like Bitcoin Historico. So solveaisummit.com, bitcoinhistorico.com, and the Bitcoin Country podcast.
Bada bang. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And I would love to come down in November. It really is a beautiful time of year to be in the country, especially with all the Bitcoin stuff going on. So I hope to catch you guys then.
Look forward to it. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, bro. Peace.
Cheers. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you could drop a like and a share, it would help in our mission to accelerate adoption. If you're looking for more Bitcoin signal, join over 10,000 readers of our newsletter, Bitcoin News Weekly. Every Monday morning, we send out the biggest headlines of Bitcoin to keep you in the know in under 5 minutes. Links below in the description. Then come hang with us live every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern. We break it all down live on stream with a new guest, and you can add your 2 sats in the chat. See you next week.